He was like a kid that was always alone. He was always bullied every day. He was just an outcast. Yeah. I mean, he would sit alone at lunch. I mean, he was just an outcast, and you know how kids are nowadays, so they're going to see someone like that, and they're going to target him because they think it's funny or whatever. So it's the best way I can describe it. And it's honestly kind of sad. Like, I don't want to say this is what provoked it, but you never know.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't breathe. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, thoughts build up until I can't.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. If you're unfamiliar with this channel, I'm an author of dozens of true crime books. I've written about incels. I've also written about and profiled many shooters. And it's been almost a week since Donald Trump narrowly escaped the crosshairs of 20-year-old Thomas Crooks. Naturally, I've followed the case with interest and also noticed how no one seems to be able to say what the motive is of Thomas Crooks. There are headlines like, Trump shooting motive unknown 3 days after assassination attempt. Shooter Thomas Matthew Crooks' motive remains unknown as investigators find materials in car. Thomas Crooks' phone yields no clues about motive. Apparently, the portrait of Thomas Crooks is just too complex to decipher. Do you believe that? And apparently, if someone doesn't leave a note or a manifesto, it's simply impossible to figure out why they did what they did. There are other headlines like Loner and Nice, complex portrait of gunman in Trump assassination attempt emerges. Another one, Trump shooter Thomas Crooks' classmates describe quiet student as investigators search for motive. The FBI is analyzing all of the gunman's electronic devices, not just his phone, for evidence of his motive. While the FBI, experts, psychologists, and cops are trying to figure out the motive, do you mind if I give it a go? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, just to repeat, I wrote a book a few years ago where I profiled these individuals, including a shooting that has many parallels to this one, the one in Vegas. I was actually in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, and that was someone who fired into a large crowd. And it's quite similar in a sense to what we saw here. And so maybe I'm missing something because Crooks' motive is blindingly obvious to me. Well, am I right? Does it make sense? Well, let's have a look at that. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button. I'll also put a link to the description to that book I wrote in the description. And let's get started. Now, before we deal with motive, I want to lay down a few ground rules, some of which you are almost guaranteed to not like. But I'm not really here to be likable, to put views across that are going to be popular. I'm here to simply give authentic analysis. So first of all, certainly in terms of political affiliations, there's going to be none of that here. So if you're hoping to have support for this or that candidate or this or that political party, there's nothing political about this analysis. So I'm not here to pander to that. I'm here to identify Crooks' motive. Secondly, this isn't going to be a sophisticated deep dive into timelines, trajectories, or conspiracies, or the failures of the Secret Service. You might find it really boring. This is about Crooks' motive and only that. Thirdly, we're going to go to the most vanilla, the most generic source for information on who this guy is, right? In order to draw we've got to start with his identity in order to begin to draw a silhouette of, who this person is, his identity, and then start coloring a little within the line. Now, obviously, we're trying to profile who he is, trying to get a sense of what makes this individual different to other people. And the point of this is to show, and I'm saying by using a generic source, is to show just how little psychological material one needs to develop a cogent profile. You don't need to be a James Bond. You don't need to be some kind of crack Sherlock Holmes investigator. And you don't really need a lot of detail either. You don't need a lot of psychological material to develop a profile. And of course, we are using some true crime rocket science techniques, which certainly helps us get to where we need to go. And so we will be dipping into criminal intertextuality. That was mentioned by, was it the Minnesota Lawyer publication not that long ago. And so we're going to be referring to that in this particular setting. It's quite important to emphasize that. Criminal intertextuality, but within this particular setting, to thin slice our way to his psychology. Finally, I'm going to share my opinion on how all of his background adds up and fits together based on pattern recognition and profiling. Again, it's not intended to be popular or interesting or to be filled with political intrigue. It's intended to show who someone is, and if you can do that cleverly, effectively, concisely, then you can also tell why they did what they did. Okay, so let's go into his background from Wikipedia. Thomas Matthew Crooks was born on September 20th, 2003 and was raised in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. That's already a very important clue. The neighborhood he lived in was described by a local politician as middle class, maybe upper middle class. Both of his parents worked as licensed professional counselors, also important clue. Recollections about Crooks, including information about his life and personality, vary considerably. Also an important clue. Why? This shows that people didn't really know him very well. He wasn't really close to anyone. He attended Bethel Park High School, also important clue, where he was known as an above-average student. In 2022, he graduated with high honors and won a $500 Star Award from the National Math and Science Initiative. What does that tell you? We've got something of a whiz kid here, an intelligent kid, but also likely seen by his peers as a nerd. And so here you have it reinforced in the very next line. Classmates and school officials characterized him as quiet, with classmates saying he was often bullied for various reasons. And so now we get all the reasons he was bullied. He was bullied because he was quiet. He was bullied because he had body odor. He was bullied because he was wearing camouflage hunting outfits. He was bullied because he wore surgical masks to school. Quite a few reasons, and I'm sure there were many more besides those. Crooks enjoyed playing chess and video games, and he was learning how to program computers. In a way, he kind of reminds me of Bill Gates, just in terms of how he appears. Some students and graduates from Bethel Park High School allege that Crooks tried out for his school's rifle team, but he failed the tryout because of poor aim. I don't know, perhaps people didn't actually want him to be part of that group either. The Bethel Park School District said there's no record of Crooks trying out for the team. Crooks earned an associate degree in engineering science from the Community College of Allegheny County, am I pronouncing that right? Graduating 2 months before the shooting. So we can see that he was clearly at a kind of a milestone, at a juncture in his life, at an important juncture. He just graduated and he was now going to move on to study at, I think, the Robert Morris University. And that's also important because it tells you that he was very much based in Pennsylvania. That was his home, that was his turf in a way. The other thing that's important is he was employed as a dietary aide in a local nursing home at the time of the shooting. So do you think that he had friends in terms of his work? Do you think he had interesting colleagues that he hung out with when he, between shifts, if he was working at a nursing home? According to the nursing home, he had passed a background check and performed his job without concern. Do you think it was a fun life working at a local nursing home as a 20-year-old? Also, he had no known criminal record and no known mental health problems. Well, except for the ones that he mentioned himself. Then on July 12, 2024, Crooks went to the shooting range where he was a member to practice firing. He purchased over 50 rounds of ammunition and a ladder before going to the rally on July 13th, the very next day. He successfully requested the day off from work because he had something to do. He also told his co-workers he would be back the next day. And then as of July 2024, an investigation by the FBI is still underway. Crooks' motivation remains unknown. That's all from Wikipedia. unknown but not unknowable. So let's move into some critical thinking. Based on the above, we already have far more than enough to work with. I've heard some say that Crooks was mercilessly bullied, while others, including teachers, say it was no big deal, but I'm going to go with the notion that it was a big deal. It might not have been a big deal to some of the people around him, may not have been a big deal to his teachers, may not have been a big deal to the school, but I'm going to go with the notion that it was a big deal to him. Further, one does have a sense just by looking at him that he's the sort of nerdy kid that would be bullied, and worse, that it would affect him. So we see the beginnings of social death right here. Just as we saw with Rex Human and Brian Koberger, we see the social death setting in a crucial period of a person's life. While everyone else is having their happy time, they are going to the prom, they're having a great time, they're trampling on another person's life and, taking probably sadistic pleasure out of that, feeling very great about themselves while making someone else feel like a nothing and a nobody. We see that he's humiliated when at school, and this is aggravated by the fact that he's a loner. Well, he becomes a loner and he becomes quieter and quieter. And so he doesn't have much of a support system around him, which is why he ends up lonely and quiet. And so what happens? The humiliation becomes internalized. The humiliation becomes part of his identity. All of that name calling becomes part of who he is. And let's face it, when you're a teenager, a big part of who you are is who others say you are. Now, to make matters worse, his parents are both counselors. And so one has a sense of an insular young person who is essentially trapped in the cage of his own mind and to some extent his body. There's also this attempt to derive power from machines and mechanical things, just like Rex Human did. And in this case, it's engineering and guns. And as I say, similar to what we saw with Rex Human, the suspect in the Long Island serial killer case. Now, we also know the last thing that Crooks did was search for porn, which, and again, I'm going out on a limb here, it possibly indicates that he didn't have a girlfriend at 20 years old. And thanks to a legacy of humiliation, he likely never had one. And now he's on the cusp of going to college, where he fully expects to be emasculated all over again. The porn also feeds a dual mechanism that is germinating within, which is heightened impulsivity. So, you feel a certain thing, you think a certain thing, you act on it. That's what the porn is kind of emphasizing or reinforcing. Also, as he invests more and more into fantasy and fiction, which is what pornography also is, he becomes more and more out of touch with reality, with other people. And so the fantasy takes root of doing something which he ultimately did do. And so, anyway, I'm just saying that the pornography, basically, the little bit that is holding him to society, the pornography actually aggravates. And so he becomes someone who is not being glued to other people, is not glued to society. And there's nothing really to hold him back from doing terrible things, either to others or to himself. And now we start to drill down to the nitty-gritty. Why Trump? Why did he target Trump? And this is the part that I think some of you are really not going to enjoy listening to. So again, going back to the generic description from Wikipedia, I don't know if Wikipedia is extremely political, but this is what they say. Prior to the shooting, Crooks had searched for images and public appearances of Trump and President Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland and FBI Director Christopher A. Wray and Princess of Wales Kate Middleton. He also made internet searches for major depressive disorder. So where you might say, I don't think he had any mental health problems. I think anyone who's humiliated a lot at school probably is going to have some mental health issues. And he also did a lot of internet searches on the Oxford high school shooting with authorities finding an arrest photograph of the Oxford shooter Ethan Crumbley on his phone. Now, what's not in that Wikipedia description is that he was also researching the trials of Crumbley's parents. Now, I agree 100% with the theory that Crooks was simply looking for anyone who was relatively high profile in order to make and leave his mark. If Biden had been actively campaigning nearby, Crooks would have targeted Biden, and given Biden's lack of animation, when he speaks, compared to Trump, one would imagine he would have succeeded in a similar kind of situation. Trump happened to be in the area, barely 50 miles away, and so it was an opportunity that presented itself. And this is, after all, the area where Crooks had lived his entire life. That brings us now to motive. Well, his motive isn't so much why Trump, because it wasn't really directed against Trump. It was a larger gripe against society. And given the type of weapon he used, a semi-automatic AR-15, it's actually surprising more people weren't killed. People forget that although the shooter missed a direct hit to his primary target, one man was killed regardless, a firefighter. I'm not sure if anyone else was injured, but we know that Trump was injured. So at least there were two victims at least in this. And had Crooks had a little more time, probably many, many more could have died, just as we saw in Las Vegas. When you look at pictures of Trump, there's just like a wall of people behind him. So what is his motive? Well, it's a kind of payback. It is a kind of grievance he's had against society. And of course, society has had a grievance against him. And he means to do something memorable so that he dies with significance, rather than to just die with insignificance. So he's reached the point that he is going to die, and he doesn't want to just die quietly. He wants to kind of make a statement. And I think the reason that he wants to die to begin with is because of he has been made to feel insignificant. Now, it's ironic that the cops can't seem to figure out the motive when even his schoolmates can, and in my opinion have. And an article in the Washington Post has already published that. I'm not going to repeat it verbatim, but a friend of him said Tom was a good guy, if I had to speculate, and he says what he assumes it is, and I think he's right. In similar situations to this, I've also noticed the authorities seemingly stupefied by motive, or else they are unusually coy about it. And I suspect this is because they don't want to be so explicit about it to trigger other young men. Which is why, even though I'm dealing with it here, I'm also not dealing with it directly or explicitly either. Now, we know Crooks was intelligent. We know that he knew there was a security sniper that could easily target him as soon as he fired the first bullet. He could see the sniper, and sure enough, the security sniper did see him very early on. And that was, I suspect, what Crooks wanted. So if you're thinking, what's the motive? There's the motive. He didn't wear body armor or anything to protect himself. His grey Demolition Ranch t-shirt barely counted as camouflage. And then before I finish, I want to just bring up a secondary aspect, which I've got to acknowledge is possibly not true, possibly not accurate, possibly, I mean, it certainly is speculative, but it is possibly, there's a chance that there is some reality to this aspect. Because of his research into Crumbley and the trial of Crumbley's parents, and the fact that, like Adam Lanza, Crooks used a firearm belonging to one of his parents. In Crooks's case, it was his father's firearm. In Lanza's case, I think it was his mother's. I do wonder whether he wanted his parents to get into trouble as well. So Crooks might have had a grudge against one or both of his parents. I'm almost certain that he did. A lot of young people do anyway, even if they get along with them. And one possible reason, out of many though, but one possible reason why he may have had a grudge against his parents may have been that they favored his older sister Katie, who by all accounts was a go-getter. She'd moved out. He was still living with his parents. She'd moved out. I think had been moved out 3 years already. She was regarded as a nice person. I think she had friends, and lots of good things were going on in her life. And possibly his folks admonished him repeatedly for not being more like her? Why can't you be more like Katie? And it's also interesting that this happened prior to Crooks attending college, just prior to him going on to college, which may have involved him either leaving home, maybe that was something that was imminent, that was something that was perhaps expected, or perhaps the possibility was that he was being asked to leave the home. And this may have exacerbated whatever crisis he felt. He may have just felt, I should leave home, but I don't feel ready to. I should leave home, but I'm terrified of leaving home. I should leave home, but what if I do and I'm with people that treat me like garbage, and so I don't want to live at home and I don't want to live not at home. We know Rex Human ended up living permanently in the house he grew up in, and we know what he turned that house into. And Brian Koberger likely also felt emasculated by his much older and much cooler older sister. So what do you think of this cursory analysis? Do you think it makes sense? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Police searched the gunman's home earlier looking for any evidence or any clues toward a motive. He lived about an hour south of the rally location.